The Saturn-Neptune conjunction begins on February 20th of 2026. And what that is when the planet Saturn and the planet Neptune align in the sky. This conjunction, these are called synodic cycles. And these, the way I loved chemistry in school. I loved the elemental table, the periodic table. Maybe that's why I love astrology. I used to love putting the chemicals together. And what happens with these planets, they each have a certain personality, an archetypal personality. But when every 35 years, or maybe it's a 45-year cycle, or maybe it's a 145-year cycle, when they come together, they create like a new chemical where they combine the meanings of the planets, the archetypal meanings of the planets, which creates new industries. And especially when we're dealing with the planet Saturn, because Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn in the zodiac. Capricorn is in the natural zodiac, the 10th house of career, our reputation, leaders of the world, what we came here to do. It has a lot to do with the structures in our lives, the structures of our businesses, the structures of our houses. And it's very rigid. Saturn is the last planet we can see with our eyes. The ancients probably believed that we were going to fall off the universe if you could look past Saturn. Saturn is also, when we interpret it in astrology, it's the planet of karmic payback, so to speak. So basically, if you try to do good things, hopefully good things will happen. If you try to do bad things, at some point the karmic payback shows up. Saturn is also the judgment planet, where we self-judge ourselves all the time, or we judge other people. And it's been rampant the last few years. Saturn has been doing a dance across the cosmic horizons the last few years. A lot of Capricorn was in the sky, a lot of judgments, a lot of people taking corners. But now with it lining up with Neptune, which is the planet of spirituality, that's the positive side of it. Neptune is also the planet of fogginess. But when you get these two together, it's like you're changing the form of things that Saturn rules. And you have to use your intuition. And physicist Albert Einstein once said, and he was a Pisces ruled by Neptune, intuition is our sacred gift. Intuition, by the way, is going to be your real gift as you go through this next year. The rational mind is its faithful servant. In many ways, Saturn is the rational mind. Oh, I don't know if you can do that. But there's something inside of you that says, I think I can. I just have to figure out the way in which to do that. That's the Saturn-Neptune coming together on February 20th of 2026. In July of 25 was just a few months ago. Saturn and Neptune were almost, but no cigar, almost connected. They were just within 13 minutes of each other in July. And a lot of new ideas started popping up in July and August, groups coming together. But then they went off on their own tangents until they come together officially on February 20th. So applying this kind of information to the Saturn-Neptune cycle, where Neptune is the planet of intuition and Saturn is the rational partner who brings the ideas into tangible form. It'll have 35 years to evolve. The last time these two characters were together was in 1989. They were about 13 or 14 degrees of Capricorn. Ironically, and we'll be talking about that at the time in a few minutes, this is actually the same week that the Exxon Valdez, the oil leak took place, and the entire ocean near where this took place was completely contaminated. And the irresponsibility of the companies came up in the news. And so this is part of what I think is Saturn-Neptune is about, is that the things that have been hidden, the things that corporate people are doing, the corporations that have been playing the long game, a lot of these cons are being revealed and coming to the surface after this conjunction takes place. And after Saturn has a little, because Saturn is faster, after Saturn has a little time to separate from Neptune, because Saturn moves about 12 degrees a year. Neptune only moves about maybe 3 degrees a year or 2 degrees a year. So Saturn's faster. It'll be separating out, and then all of a sudden you see the reality. So doors close and windows open. So the other thing that happens is every time we get this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, since Saturn has a lot to do with business and Neptune has a lot to do with dissipation, you throw water and it goes away, it evaporates. We often will see recessions. I'm not going to get into the political environment at all, but it is, in terms of a cycle, it is a recessionary cycle. It's like a reality check. Too much credit, too much debt, too much spending. And I actually just pulled these up from, I think it was Bank of America, just sent out a brand new Outlook thing that they do. And you can see it here. I went back to, this only goes back to 1961, the one on the bottom, but you can see 1989 is the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, where we had a pretty long recession there. And then we had another major conjunction take place, Uranus and Neptune, 93 to 95. It was also in Capricorn. And here we see it again. This is 2025. It's heading down here. We also had the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in early 1952, continued for 35 years, but 1952 to 1954, a lot of change was happening. It was the Red Scare. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Neptune also rules mergers or dissolving or dissolution, when companies will not be able to stay in business because they have different reasons for not staying in business, too much debt, too much cost, too much whatever. But I truly believe, looking at this, unless something happens, that we are heading into a recession. And I don't think this is news for anybody looking at this, but if you want to explore this chart further, you can. But here's the other part. Neptune, when it moves on January 26th of 2026 into Aries, which is a fire sign, and historically, every time Neptune moves into a fire sign, the week it went into Sagittarius in 1971 or 72. That same week is when we went off the gold standard in the United States. So fire sign Neptunes always reflect inflation because it's spending, a lot of spending. Saturn will also be going into a fire sign in the middle of February. It'll be going into Aries. And so in a lot of ways, it could be that the wild card of Neptune going into fire, Aries, can be subdued somewhat by Saturn, who may hold the reins on impulse spending or on impulse action. So in some ways, they could be actually help each other as we go through the recession for individuals as well as for the world at large. Here are some of the rulerships, and there's books and books of rulerships. There's Lee Lehman's book on rulerships, Rex Bill's book on rulerships. There's a lot of really good books on rulerships, but a few things. Remember, Neptune dissolves, Saturn is the rule. So Saturn rules the law, the ethics, and structures of the law. Well, that's been dissolving with Neptune. Saturn represents boundaries and karmic consequences. Saturn can be punitive or wise, depending upon the situation. Saturn forms structures and also rules land and real estate and large corporations and foundations. Foundations being foundations like in the ground, foundations you put into the ground. Saturn and Neptune in Aries can also create an environment for plagues or diseases of the skin and fevers, because Saturn rules the skin and Neptune is notorious for, I don't know if I want to say plagues, but for airborne or water-driven diseases and viruses. And there's a lot of debate right now, whether you like it or not, about vaccines. There is a growing amount of measles now because some people have chosen not to vaccinate their children, and that's up to the individual, of course. But it wouldn't surprise me if we see more of those kinds of things with Saturn and Neptune. Neptune can be as well as inspirational because it does rule the third eye. It can also be delusional, where we can be confused. Delusional can be more mental illness. Saturn with Neptune could be finally getting a few handles on how to handle the people that are mentally ill and do some sort of form to help them. You have to choose these things. Every planet has two sides. You can't say that a planet is good or a planet is bad. Every planet has two sides to its nature. And so which will one choose? Neptune rules water, the oceans, shipping companies, ships, tidal waves. It rules mental health. Neptune is Dionysus, the god of ecstasy and madness, who brings the ecstatic experience, which can be dancing at a Grateful Dead concert or being a schizophrenic. Hospital care, hospitals, places that take care of people. Saturn is the dissolving of the form of those industries. We've seen what's happening. Prisons. Neptune rules con artists and grifters. And it's very interesting because Neptune is almost 14 years in Pisces now. There are more and more scam texts coming in now in the last few months than we've ever seen in a long time. And they're getting more and more sophisticated. And that's probably because Neptune is at the end of Pisces, trying to finish up in Pisces. So be very, very careful about what you're hitting, and what you're thinking is really somebody trying to communicate with you, and they're not. Neptune also, but here's the other side. Neptune rules music, the theater, dance, meditation, physical healing, and psychological healing. It rules tin. I don't know why I threw that in there. And it rules the feet. Neptune rules the pharmaceutical companies, also addictions and much confusion. What we will probably see, because there's going to be a lot of downsizing, it's already been happening with Saturn, which pulls in the belt. We're going to probably see a lot of corporate mergers happening in the next year and a half as these two come together and do their thing. Neptune also rules oil. And so this is interesting. I just found this in Columbus Dispatch just a couple of days ago. The tar pit. They're saying that there's a global oil glut right now. Saturn conjunct Neptune could lower the price of oil, but it also could be, how else will we use oil? I know we use it in our plastics, which is unfortunate because it is getting into our water system. But how else can we use oil? How can we use it in siding, in floorboards, in things that we haven't thought about yet? But it could be that the stock market, which has been going crazy in the last year, except for in mid-March, could have a little bit of a turn somewhere around the end of February when these two characters come together. I mentioned the Exxon Valdez that happened on the same week of the Saturn-Neptune in 1989. So, again, we're dealing with water issues and filtration issues. So some of the new businesses or the new industries coming in could very likely be meeting filtration challenges, like for the microplastics that we're hearing more and more of in the news, and how to clean the oceans. I think we're going to see the truth about more water pollution after the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which will drive new industries or new ways of fixing it. Because once those two come together and Saturn starts to separate out, we're going to be seeing the things that we've been hearing about, but we don't see yet. Any filtration technology, I think, is going to be very big. It's going to be pioneering. There will be, in the next 35 years, especially in the next maybe 5 to 7, filters that clean seawater, cool water, ballast water, industrial and service water, the filtration of liquid fuels for other uses, the filtration of blood. Neptune rules the blood. The filtration of the blood, to clean out viruses or clean out things that shouldn't be in there. The filtration of the earth. Saturn rules land, the earth. Neptune, the filtering of the soil. And once you start knocking down buildings or changing building usages, you usually see problems, especially if they're old edifices. You see problems in the soil. And so you have to come up with ways of cleaning the soil. In the 1850 to the 1860 era, when Neptune last entered Aries, as it's going to do again in January of 2026, New York figured out a comprehensive plan to design and implement the sewer system after there was a major cholera breakout. And cholera is carried through the water. It's interesting when you go back in history and you see what they were doing then, what they could be doing now with new technologies. And the thing to remember, with Neptune and Saturn going into Aries, Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. It's young, it likes to take risks, it's sometimes overreactive, but it is known to be brave and somewhat pioneering. And so this is part of what I see is a lot of pioneering kinds of technologies dealing with these two planets and the things that they rule. Medical tech filters are further developing. They were developing a couple of years ago during the Jupiter-Neptune, but it is one of the big growing industries right now. They developed during COVID. Blood filters were designed to filter COVID, developed by DARPA. Tissue-like gels that tell you the chemical reactions inside the body. They're going to be doing more and more of this to find out, instead of invading the body, to do these like insertions to find out what is going on. And so I think a lot of medical technology is going to be very pioneering in the next few years after the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And this is one I love. In fact, when I wrote my book, Pushing Through Time, Synodic Cycles and Their Developing Phases, I did a chapter for each of the synodic cycles. And the chapter that I did on Saturn-Neptune was a little bit about the Exxon Valdez. But I also went back through history and looked at the arts, especially music. And we saw, like in the Saturn-Neptune of the 30s, we saw a lot of blues happening at that point. Then Saturn-Neptune came along in the early 50s. That's when we saw the beginning of rock and roll. Then in the 89, 90, the beginning of New Age. So you'll see as a result of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, a lot of new art forms, which is, I think, quite frankly, industries that are going to be growing rather than retreating in the arts, in music, in film, in theater. Theater is ruled by Neptune, where the forms will change, where there could be theater traveling, small theaters traveling like they used to do in the old days through towns. I think we will also start to see a lot more films that include more social commentary, very similar to what was happening in the films of the early 1990s. Less films of Marvel heroes, which is the buffed out gods in comic books. More films in the form of docudramas. History is learned now through media. It's not necessarily learned through books. And we will see more films, I think, of the ability of the disenfranchised to become personally empowered. And I do think that's coming in, especially with the Pisces, Aries, end of the zodiac, beginning of the zodiac. So when the going gets tough, the tough reinvent is what I'm saying. When times are tough or problems arise, people get very creative.